It was the fall of 1994, in a quiet river town in Callum County, where nobody locked their doors and everybody knew whose truck was whose. Nora Rusk was 27 years old. She was a midwife. She went out on a call one rainy night in September, and she never came home. Her truck was found the next morning on the Levee Road, locked, her boots set neatly on the tailgate. There was no blood, no struggle, no note. She had vanished without a trace, and within 4 months, the case quickly went cold. 21 years later, one small detail reopened it. Not a body, not a witness. A birth certificate filed 2 decades late by a young woman who had no idea what she was holding. What that single piece of paper revealed was a truth no one in Callum County was prepared for. And by the time it came out, half the town already knew. If stories like this matter to you, take 1 second to hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling them. Now, let's get into today's case. Little Harmon, Callum County. Population 2,140 in 1994. And that number was generous. It was a bottomland town, built low against a slow brown river that flooded about every 7 years and rearranged everybody's expectations. There was one blinking traffic light. There was a feed store, a Baptist church, a Methodist church that didn't speak to the Baptist one, and a diner called the Blue Hen where the coffee was bad and the pie was worth the drive. There was no hospital. The nearest one was 51 minutes away in Ashby, and that was if the county road wasn't underwater. Which is why Little Harmon needed Nora Rusk. Nora was 27 that fall. She was small, barely 5'2", with dark hair she kept in a braid down her back, and a laugh that was much too loud for her body. She had a gap between her front teeth she'd never been self-conscious about. She wore men's work boots because women's boots fell apart in the mud. And she carried a canvas bag with a broken zipper she'd fixed with a safety pin in 1991 and never replaced. She was a licensed lay midwife. She had caught, by her own count, 183 babies. She kept the count in a spiral notebook. Not the names went in the official log, but the count, in pencil, on the inside back cover. 183 tally marks. Her brother used to tease her that it looked like a prison wall. Her brother was Danny. Danny Rusk was 19 in 1994, and he worked at the feed store loading 50-pound sacks into the beds of trucks. He was tall and gangly, and he stuttered a little when he got excited, and he thought his sister hung the moon. She was 8 years older. She'd half raised him. Their father, Ray, had worked barge maintenance and came home tired and quiet. Their mother, Wilma, worked doubles at the nursing home in Ashby. So it was Nora who taught Danny to tie his shoes, Nora who signed his permission, slips in their mother's handwriting, Nora who sat on the end of his bed when the river came up in '89 and told him the water always goes back down, eventually. Everything does, Danny. Everything goes back down. She learned midwifery from their grandmother, Opal Rusk, who had caught babies in that county for 40 years without a license, because nobody had asked for one back then. Opal died in 1990. She left Nora 3 things: a set of steel instruments in a rolled canvas case, a Bible with pressed flowers in it, and a knot. The knot mattered. Remember the knot. It was how Opal tied off an umbilical cord, not the standard tie. 2 loops crossed opposite, then a tuck under the second loop, and pulled snug a knot that would not slip and would not bind. Opal had learned it from her own mother. She called it a granny hitch, and she was very particular about it. Anybody can catch a baby, Opal used to say. Any fool with warm hands. Tying it off is where you show what you are. Nora tied that knot 183 times. She drew it, too, a little doodle. 2 loops and a tail in the margins of her paperwork, the way some people draw stars or boxes while they're on the phone. It was on her grocery lists. It was on the back of her insurance card. It was, Danny would tell people later, the closest thing his sister had to a signature. Nora lived in a rented shotgun house on Farrell Street with a porch light she left on all night, every night, because women went into labor at 3 in the morning, and she wanted them to see where to turn in. That porch light was on when she disappeared. It stayed on for a long time after. In the spring of 1993, Nora started dating a man named Wade Cormier. Wade was 34. He was a medical supply rep, sutures, gloves, sterile trays, that kind of thing. And he covered 6 counties out of a burgundy Buick that was always clean. He had a good haircut. He remembered names. He shook Danny's hand the first time they met and said, "Your sister talks about you like you invented electricity." And Danny liked him instantly. Their mother liked him too. Their father didn't say much either way, but he didn't say anything against it. And for Ray Rusk, that was practically a blessing. Wade was charming. That's the word everyone used, before and after, charming. But there were things. He never invited Nora to his place in Ashby. Not once in 18 months. He always drove to Little Harmon. He paid cash for everything. Every meal, every tank of gas, every anything, a folded stack in his front pocket, always fresh bills, always exact. He had a beeper, which was normal, and a second beeper, which was not. And once, at Christmas 1993, Danny walked into the kitchen and heard Wade on the phone in the hallway saying, in a voice Danny had never heard him use, "She's not the problem. She's never been the problem. Just tell her I said the count is fine." Wade hung up, came into the kitchen, and asked Danny if he wanted to see the new stereo in the Buick. Danny was 19. He didn't think about it again for 22 years. The change in Nora started in July of 1994. It was small. It was the kind of thing you only notice about somebody you've known your whole life. She stopped humming. Nora hummed constantly hymns, mostly, badly, half a beat off. She hummed while she washed dishes, while she filled out forms, while she drove. And sometime in that hot July, she just stopped. And the quiet in her kitchen was so strange that Danny asked her about it. And she said she had a headache, and she'd had one for a week. Then other things. She started locking her door in Little Harmon in 1994. She asked Danny, out of nowhere, whether the feed store kept records of who bought what and how long they kept them, and whether anybody ever went back and checked. She got a new spiral notebook, and she wrote in it at the kitchen table, with her arm curled around the top of the page, the way a kid does on a test. And in August, she asked her mother a question that Wilma Rusk would repeat, word for word, for the rest of her life. She said, "Mama, if somebody did something bad a long time ago, and everybody let them, is everybody guilty?" Wilma laughed and told her to go to bed. Something felt wrong, really wrong, but nobody in that house had a name for it yet. On the last Sunday in August, Nora and Danny sat on her porch and split a bottle of orange soda and watched the river fog come up over the levee like something being poured. She said, "Danny, if I ever had to go away for a while, not forever, just for a while, you'd know it was me deciding it, right?" He said, "Where would you go?" She said, "Nowhere. Forget it." Then she reached over and messed up his hair like he was still 8 years old. And she said something he did not understand for 2 decades. She said, "The paper's always there, Bug. Even when the people are gone, the paper's still there. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. 16 days later, she was gone. It rained for 3 days before it happened. Not hard. That slow, patient September rain that soaks the fields and turns the shoulders of the county roads to soup. The river came up 11 inches. Everybody watched it the way people in that town always watched it, casually, out of the corner of an eye. Nora spent that Wednesday at home. Her mother called at 4 in the afternoon, and they talked for 6 minutes about nothing, a casserole, a cousin's divorce, whether Wilma should get her hair cut short. Nora sounded fine. Tired, but fine. At 9:40 p.m., a call came into the Rusk house from Nora, and Danny answered it. He was 19, and he was watching television with the sound down, and he did not know that he was having the last conversation of his life with his sister, and so he did not pay attention the way he would have paid attention if God had given him 1 hour of warning. She said, "I've got one tonight." He said, "Bad weather for it." She said, "They always come in bad weather." Then a pause, a long one, long enough that he said her name, and she said, "Danny, tell Mama I love her." He said, "Tell her yourself. You'll see her Sunday." And she said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay." And then the line went dead. He would replay those 11 seconds for 21 years. At 6:15 the next morning, a man named Curtis Pyle drove out to Cutter's Landing to check his trot lines and found a white 1987 Ford Ranger parked crooked at the end of the gravel, half off the road, nose toward the water. He knew the truck. Everybody knew the truck. The doors were locked. The keys were inside, sitting in the cup holder. Her canvas bag with the safety pin zipper was on the passenger seat, unopened, still packed. Sterile pads, clamps, a blood pressure cuff, her grandmother's rolled canvas case of steel instruments, and on the tailgate, set side by side, laces tucked in, toes pointed toward the river, her work boots. Placed, not dropped, placed. Curtis Pyle stood in the drizzle at Cutter's Landing for a long moment, and then he got back in his own truck and drove into town without his trot lines, because his blood ran cold, and he did not know why. The man who caught the case was a Callum County Sheriff's investigator named Hollis Tarpley. Tarpley was 56. He had a bad hip, a divorce, and the resigned face of a man who had been disappointed by his fellow citizens professionally for 30 years. He chewed sunflower seeds constantly and kept a paper cup in his hand for the shells. He was not brilliant, but he was thorough, and he was honest. And in that county in 1994, that was more than you had a right to expect. He worked that scene like a man who already knew he was going to lose. They brought in dogs from the state police out of Ashby, 2 bloodhounds, and a shepherd. They gave the dogs a pillowcase from Nora's bed. The dogs took the scent off the tailgate, went straight down the gravel toward the water, and stopped. 38 feet from the truck. All 3 dogs. The same spot. They circled. They cast wide. They came back to that same patch of packed mud, 38 feet from the tailgate, and sat down and would not go further. The handler told Tarpley what that usually meant. It usually meant a vehicle. It usually meant somebody got picked up. But it also meant water. And the water was right there. They dragged the channel for 9 days. They sent divers down twice. The river gave them a bicycle frame, a washing machine, and 400 pounds of somebody's old dock. It did not give them Nora Rusk. Forensics on the truck came back almost insultingly clean. No blood, no hair that wasn't hers, no fibers of interest. The steering wheel had her prints and only hers. The tailgate had her prints and only hers. But there was one thing in that truck that Hollis Tarpley never got past. He talked about it until the day he died. on the floorboard of the passenger side, folded, clean, dry, a newborn's knit cap, cream-colored wool, hand-knitted, small enough to sit in the palm of your hand. That was not unusual on its own. Nora knitted them. She gave one to every baby she caught. Everybody knew that. What was unusual was this. There was no birth. Tarpley checked. He checked the county, and then he checked the 4 counties around it. And then he checked the hospitals in Ashby and Wren. He checked every birth registered in the state of that entire week. Nobody in Callum County gave birth on the night of September 14th, 1994. Nobody called Nora Rusk. There was no appointment in her book. There was no expectant mother within 20 miles who was anywhere close to term. She had told her brother, "I've got one tonight." And there was no one. Tarpley wrote a single line in his notes that November. And it survives in the file. Who called her out? He never answered it. Suspicion went where suspicion goes. Wade Cormier was interviewed 4 times. He was polished. He was cooperative. He cried once at the second interview, and Tarpley noted in the margin that the crying started and stopped a little too cleanly. Wade said he was in Wren County that night at a motel, working the northern part of his territory. The motel had a register with his name on it. The clerk vaguely remembered him. There was a receipt. There was also a gap. 4.5 hours, from about 8 until half past midnight, that nobody could account for. Wren County was 70 minutes from Cutter's Landing. Tarpley pushed. Wade got a lawyer out of Ashby, a good one, faster than a medical supply rep should have been able to afford. That fact bothered Tarpley for 21 years, too. But there was no physical evidence. There was no body. There was no crime scene. Because technically, legally, there was no crime. There was only a locked truck and a pair of boots and a woman who was not where she was supposed to be. The county searched the bottoms in October with 200 volunteers and a line of men walking arm's length apart through soybean stubble. The story ran in the Ashby paper twice, then once more at Christmas, then not again. By February of 1995, the case quickly went cold. There was one other thing. It seemed like nothing at the time. In the second week of the investigation, a woman came to the sheriff's office and sat with Tarpley for 40 minutes. Her name was Verna Lloyd. She was 61 years old, and in Callum County she was closer to royalty than anybody would have admitted out loud. Verna was the county public health nurse. She had been for 26 years. She ran the clinic on Bell Street. She ran the immunization drive. She sat on the school board. And this is the part that matters. She was the county's deputy registrar of vital statistics, birth certificates, death certificates. Every child born in Callum County came across Verna Lloyd's desk and went into the state's records because she typed the form and signed the line. She came to tell Tarpley that she was worried about Nora. She said Nora had seemed unwell lately, distracted. She said, gently, carefully, that there had been some questions about Nora's record-keeping, nothing serious, nothing she'd wanted to make a fuss over. But some paperwork hadn't been turned in, and some of it had come in wrong, and she wondered, she hated to even say it, whether Nora might have been under some kind of strain. She said the word strain 4 times. Tarpley wrote it down. It fit. It fit with the boots placed neatly on the tailgate, toes toward the water. It fit with a woman who told her brother to tell their mother she loved her. By spring, that was the theory half the county believed. Not out loud, never out loud. But at the Blue Hen over bad coffee, people said it the way people say things in a small town sideways, with their eyes down. Poor Nora. She just got tired. Danny Rusk heard it said in his own kitchen by a woman from the church in April of 1995. He was 20 years old. He put his hand flat on the table and he said, "She was going to a birth." And the woman said, "Honey, there wasn't a birth." And Danny said, "Then somebody made her think there was." Nobody listened. He was a kid who loaded feed sacks. Verna Lloyd was Verna Lloyd. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. And nobody but Danny seemed to care that it didn't. 21 years is not a montage when you live inside it. But this is how it went. 1996. Ray Rusk stopped going to church. He kept Nora's truck in the side yard under a blue tarp and started it once a month. He said it was to keep the seals from drying out. Everybody knew what it was for. 1998. Danny married a girl named Cheryl from the Ashby side. At the reception, Wilma set out a chair at the family table with nobody in it. And nobody said a word about it, and everybody understood. 2001. Ray Rusk died of a heart attack in the side yard, 4 feet from the truck, with the keys in his hand. He was 63. The doctor called it cardiac arrest. His wife called it something else, and she was not wrong. 2003. Wade Cormier left the medical supply business and bought a pharmacy in Ashby with money nobody could quite account for. He married a school teacher. He joined the Rotary. He became, over the next decade, a man people described as a pillar. 2004. Hollis Tarpley retired. He took 2 boxes of files home with him, which he was not supposed to do. One of them was Nora's. He kept it in his hall closet under a bag of golf clubs he never used. 2007. Wilma Rusk died in the nursing home in Ashby, where she had worked doubles for 22 years. She was 71. In her last week, she was mostly gone, and she talked to people who weren't there. And on the last night, she said very clearly to the empty side of the room, "Did you eat?" Danny was holding her hand. He said, "Who are you talking to, Mama?" And Wilma said, "Nora. She's cold. She's been out in it." She died the next morning. 2009. They took the tarp off the truck and sold it for parts. Danny kept the keys. 2011. Danny turned 36. He was a mechanic for the county school bus garage by then. He and Cheryl had 2 boys. He coached Little League badly and enthusiastically. And every Thursday morning, without fail, he did a thing that his wife thought was sweet and sad and mostly harmless. He read the legal notices. The Callum County Ledger came out Thursdays. Page 11, back half, 6-point type. Foreclosures, estate filings, name changes, abandoned property, delayed registrations. Danny read every line of it with his coffee before work. He had started in 1995 because Tarpley had told him, offhand, that people who disappear sometimes turn up in the paperwork long before they turn up anywhere else. Tarpley had meant it as a kindness. He had not meant for a 20-year-old to take it as a life sentence. Cheryl asked him once, around 2010, what exactly he was looking for. Danny thought about it and said, "Her name." For 20 years, her name was not there. It was a Thursday. It was raining. Danny Rusk was 40 years old, sitting at his kitchen table at 5:50 in the morning with coffee and the ledger folded to page 11, reading the way you read something you've read 4,000 times with your eyes, not your brain. Halfway down the second column, under delayed registration of birth, there was a notice. He read it. He kept going. He got 2 lines further. Then he stopped and went back. Notice is hereby given that application has been made to the Office of Vital Statistics for delayed registration of the birth of June Ellen Ford, female, born September 14, 1994, in Callum County. Supporting documentation submitted includes a contemporaneous attendant record executed by N.E. Rusk, midwife. Objections may be filed within 90 days. September 14th, 1994. The night she disappeared. The night there was no birth in Callum County. Danny read it 11 times. He read it until the type stopped being letters. Then he got up so fast, he knocked the chair over backward. And Cheryl came out of the bedroom and found her husband standing in the kitchen holding a newspaper with both hands and shaking so hard the paper was making noise. He couldn't get the words out. The stutter he'd mostly beaten as a teenager came back all at once. He just kept pointing at the page and saying, That's her. That's her name. That's her name." The county clerk's office opened at 8. Danny was there at 7:20, in the parking lot, in the rain, in his work uniform. The clerk was a woman named Patrice Gilkey, who had gone to school with him. She was not supposed to show him the file. It took her about 90 seconds to decide she was going to anyway. The application was thin. A cover form. An affidavit from the applicant. A notarized statement from a woman in Ashby County named Della Amberley. And one photocopied document, folded so long the crease had gone brown. Danny unfolded it on the counter. It was a handwritten card, ruled on one side, torn from a spiral notebook. Female infant, 4:52. A.M. September 14th, 94. 6 pounds, 11 ounces. No complications. Mother refused transport. Attendant, N.E. Rusk, L.M. It was her handwriting. He would have known it in the dark, the way she crossed a 7, the way her lowercase g never quite closed. And down in the bottom corner of the card, in the white space, where she always put it, where she had put it on grocery lists and phone messages and the back of her insurance card for as long as he had been alive, she had drawn the knot, 2 loops and a tuck. Danny Rusk stood in the Callum County Clerk's office at 8 in the morning on a Thursday in March and put his hand over his mouth and made a sound that Patrice Gilkey said later she had never heard a grown man make, because he had just understood 2 things at once. The first was that the birth had been real. Somebody had called his sister out that night, and she had gone, and she had caught a baby, and she had written it down like she always did. The second was worse, or better. He couldn't tell yet. The card said 4:52 a.m. Curtis Pyle found her truck at 6:15 a.m., which meant that Nora Rusk had delivered a baby, sat down somewhere, and filled out this card by hand in the last 83 minutes anyone could account for. And then somebody had kept this piece of paper safe for 21 years. Dead women don't file paperwork, and nobody keeps a scrap of ruled notebook paper for 2 decades by accident. He drove to the sheriff's office and asked for the investigator on cold cases. He got a deputy named Braden Fisk, who was 28, and polite, and had the specific patience of a man who has decided in the first 4 seconds that he's dealing with someone's grief and not someone's evidence. Fisk read the notice. He read the card. He was kind about it. He said the handwriting would need to be examined. He said a delayed registration was a civil matter, not a criminal one. He said the 1994 file had been reviewed twice, and there was nothing actionable. He said a lot of families of the missing find things that feel enormous and turn out to be coincidence, and that he'd hate for Danny to get his hopes up. He said he'd make a note of it. Danny sat in his truck in the sheriff's parking lot for 20 minutes. Then he pulled out the photocopy Patrice had run for him. And he looked at the 3rd page, the notarized statement, and at the address printed under the name Della Amberley. Marrow Hollow Road, Ashby County. 2 hours and 10 minutes away, on the far side of the state line road, up in country so folded and poor that the mail carrier still turned around in people's yards. He looked at his watch. The notice said 90 days. 90 days for anyone to object. And then the state would either grant the certificate or deny it. And either way, The file would close, and the paper would go into a drawer in the Capitol, and nobody would ever look at it again. Day 1 was already half over. He did not go to work. He called the bus garage from a gas station and told them he was sick, which was the first lie he had told his employer in 11 years. And it was not really a lie. Then he drove north. The house at the end of Marrow Hollow Road was a white clapboard with a green metal roof and a satellite dish bolted to a locust post in the yard. Della Amberley was 68. She answered the door in a housecoat with a cigarette she didn't light, looked at the man on her porch, and said, "You're not from the state." Danny said, "No, ma'am." She said, "Then who are you?" He held up the photocopy. His hands weren't steady. He said, "The midwife on this card was my sister." Della Amberley looked at the paper. Then she looked at his face for a long moment, really looked, the way older women in that country look at you, like they're pricing you. And then she said something that took the floor out from under him. She said, "Lord, you've got her chin." June Ford was 20 years old, and she was in the kitchen. She was tall, much taller than Nora had been, with sandy hair and a chipped front tooth and paint on her forearms from a job she'd been doing at the Methodist church. She was 2 semesters into a nursing program at the community college in Wren. She had needed a birth certificate to get into the clinical rotation. That was the whole reason for the filing. That was all it was ever supposed to be. She had never had one. Not ever. She had been homeschooled off a state correspondence packet. She'd gotten her driver's license on an affidavit and a school record. It had never mattered until the day it suddenly mattered completely. She sat Danny down at the kitchen table and made him coffee he didn't drink. He asked carefully where she got the card. June said, "From my mother." Danny said, "Mrs. Amberley." And June said, "No, Della raised me from 17 on. My mother died in 2011. Danny said, "What was her name?" And June Ford said, Ellen Ford." Danny put both hands flat on the table. "Nora Ellen Rusk." He said, "Do you have a picture of her?" June went and got a shoebox. The first photograph was a woman standing in a garden squinting into the sun. In her 40s, hair gone half gray, heavier than she had been, wearing a men's flannel shirt. It had been 17 years. She had aged the way their mother aged, in the jaw first. She was smaller than everyone around her. She had a gap between her front teeth. Danny made a noise. June reached over and took his wrist and didn't let go. He said, "That's Nora." He said it about 9 times. At the bottom of the shoebox, wrapped in a dish towel, were 2 things. The first was a cream-colored knit cap, handmade, small enough to sit in the palm of your hand. June said her mother told her she'd worn it home. She had kept it her whole life for no reason she could explain. Its twin had been sitting in an evidence box in Callum County since 1994. The second thing was a rolled canvas case of steel instruments, oiled and clean, that had belonged to a woman named Opal Rusk, who died in 1990. Here is what June Ford knew about her life before that afternoon. She knew she was born at home. She knew her mother had been a midwife, unlicensed, quiet about it. The kind of woman people in 3 Hollows called at 2 in the morning and paid in eggs and firewood. She knew they had moved to Marrow Hollow when she was small and had never once, in 20 years, gone back toward Callum County, not for anything, not even to shop. She knew her mother would not be photographed. There were 11 pictures of Ellen Ford in existence, and June had taken 9 of them by ambush. She knew her mother taught her to tie a cord off with 2 loops and a tuck when she was 9 years old, and made her practice on a length of clothesline until she cried. And she knew that when the cancer got bad in 2011, her mother had put that folded card into her hand and said, When you need to prove you exist, this is the only thing that will do it. Don't lose it. And when they ask you where it came from, tell them the truth. June had assumed her mother meant she'd been paid to catch a stranger's baby and kept the record. She had never once considered that the card might be about her. Danny said, "June, the name on that card is my sister. The date on that card is the night my sister disappeared from a boat landing 2 hours south of here." June said, "Then who am I?" And Danny, who had spent 21 years wanting one answer and had just been handed 40 new questions, said the only honest thing he had. He said, "I don't know, but she kept you." The grave was in a churchyard off Route 9 under a hackberry tree. Ellen Ford, 1967 to 2011. She came when she was called. Danny Rusk knelt down in wet grass in front of his sister's headstone and said out loud, "You were alive. You were alive the whole time, and you were 2 hours away." He was not gentle about it. He was furious. He sat there, and he was furious at her for an hour. And then the fury went out of him all at once, like air out of a tire. And he put his forehead against the cold granite and cried until he was hoarse. She had died 4 years earlier. 4. He had been coaching Little League. He had been reading the legal notices on Thursdays with his coffee, while his sister was 2 counties north, dying of pancreatic cancer under another woman's name. Then he stood up, and he wiped his face on his sleeve. And something in him went cold and level and stayed that way for 11 months. Because a woman does not do that to her family for 21 years, because she wants to. Somebody made her. And there were 88 days left on that notice. Danny Rusk was not a detective. He had no training, no authority, and no idea what he was doing. What he had was a knot. He'd figured out the shape of it on the drive home. His sister taught June the granny hitch. His grandmother taught his sister. That knot moved from hand to hand in person, one woman at a time. You could not learn it from a book. There was no book. So if Nora had been alive and working in that country for 17 years, she had touched other hands, and hands remember. He started with a list June wrote out from memory every woman her mother had ever mentioned, ever trained beside, ever sent a mother to. 9 names. 4 were dead. 2 had moved. That left 3. The first one hung up on him. The second one, a woman near Wren, talked to him for 20 minutes and then asked him, flatly, whether he was going to get her in trouble with the state for practicing without a license. And when he said he didn't know, she stopped talking. That was the shape of the whole thing. And Danny learned it fast. Every single person who could tell him the truth had to pay something to say it. Their license, their standing, their neighbors. Every door he knocked on. The answer cost the person answering. The third woman was named Eileen Buck. She was 52. She lived in a double-wide outside a town called Tesset, and she had 4 grandchildren and a laminated certificate on her wall from a midwifery program in 2003. Danny sat on her couch and asked whether she'd known a woman named Ellen Ford. Eileen got very still. She said, "Why?" He told her the truth, all of it. It took 40 minutes. When he was done, Eileen Bach got up, went into her kitchen, came back with a length of white cotton cord, and sat down on the coffee table facing him. She said, "Watch my hands." 2 loops crossed opposite, a tuck under the second loop. Snug. She said, 1996, October. She stood in my mother's kitchen and made me do that 40 times. Danny said, 1996. Eileen said, October. 2 years and 1 month after his sister was declared, for all practical purposes, dead in a river. Then Eileen Bach said the sentence that turned a grief into a case. She said, "She told me one thing about herself, one time. She said she used to work down in Callum, and she said if I ever went to work in Callum County, I should never, ever let the health department take my paperwork out of my hands." Danny said, "The health department." Eileen said, "She said it twice. She was serious as a heart attack. She said, 'Don't let Bell Street hold your papers.'" Bell Street. The clinic on Bell Street. Verna Lloyd. It took Danny 19 days, and it started with an obituary. Not a clue, just a thought. If Nora had caught a baby in Callum County on September 14th, 1994, then somewhere in that county there was a woman who had given birth that night and had spent 21 years never saying so. She'd be in her late 30s now. She'd have been a teenager then. He went back through the ledger on microfilm at the library in Ashby, 1994 to 1995, looking for anything about a young girl, a family, a loss. He found it in the January 1995 issues. A death notice, 3 lines, no photograph. Infant daughter of Miss Seclia Tolliver of Little Harmon. Stillborn, private services. The date of death listed was September 14th, 1994. Danny stared at that for a long time. His sister had written no complications on that card. She had written a weight, 6 pounds, 11 ounces. You do not weigh a stillborn baby and write no complications. Seclia Tolliver went by Sissy. She was 37 now. She worked at a dollar store on the highway outside Little Harmon, and she lived 11 minutes from the house Danny had grown up in. She'd been 16 years old in 1994. He waited for her in the parking lot after her shift, which he knew was a terrible thing to do, and he did it anyway. He said, "Ma'am, my name is Danny Rusk." She said, "I know who you are." He said, "In 1994, my sister." And Sissy Tolliver, standing beside her car in a red vest with her keys in her hand, said, "Is she alive?" Not what happened to her, not what's this about. Is she alive? Danny said, "She was, until 2011. And Sissy Tolliver sat down on the curb of a dollar store parking lot and started to shake. She said, "They told me she drowned. They told me she drowned because of what she did. And it was my fault. And if I ever opened my mouth about it, my mama and my daddy would find out what kind of girl I was, and the state would put me somewhere." Danny crouched down. He said, "Ma'am, what did she do?" And Sissy Tolliver said, "She took my baby out of that room." Then she looked up at him with her whole face ruined and said the thing he had crossed 2 counties and 21 years to hear. She said, "She saved her. Mister, your sister saved her, and everybody in this county let them tell me she was dead." This is what Sissy Tolliver told Danny Rusk in a parking lot, and told a grand jury 8 months later. She got pregnant at 15 by a boy who left for the Navy. Her family was Pentecostal and poor, and the shame of it was going to be the largest event of her life. Her mother took her to the clinic on Bell Street, and Verna Lloyd sat them down. And Verna Lloyd was so kind. Verna said there was a way to handle this that would be best for everyone. There were families, good families, church families, families who had money and could not have children, and who would love that baby beyond anything Sissy could imagine at 16. There would be no court, no lawyers, no caseworker in Ashby writing things down. It would be quiet, and it would be clean, and it would be over. And Sissy's mother, who was 52 and mortified and terrified, said thank you. They kept her at the clinic in the back room the last 3 weeks. Nobody visited. Her father was told she was staying with an aunt, And on the night of September 13th, 1994, Sissy went into labor 8 days early, in the rain. And the woman who was supposed to attend her was in Wren County at a wedding. So somebody made a phone call to a midwife on Farrell Street. Somebody said, "There's a girl and she's early, and I need somebody now." That is who called Nora Rusk out on the last night of her life. Nora walked into that back room at 10:30 and delivered a healthy 6-pound 11-ounce girl at 4:52 in the morning. She tied the cord with 2 loops and a tuck. She filled out a card on notebook paper because her bag was in the truck. And she used what was in the room. And then she went to hand the card to Verna Lloyd for filing, the way she had done 182 times before. And Verna Lloyd said the paperwork was already handled. Nora asked what that meant. And Verna Lloyd, 61 years old, Deputy Registrar of Vital Statistics, 26 years a public servant, made the single mistake of her entire life, she told her. She told Nora Rusk in that room at 5 in the morning that a birth certificate had already been prepared, that the child would be recorded as born to a couple in Wren County who had been waiting 14 months, that there would be no adoption because there was nothing to adopt on paper. That baby would simply have been born to somebody else. That was cleaner, that was kinder, and that this was how it had been done in Callum County since 1979. Nora asked how many. Verna Lloyd said, "Enough." The number, when the state finished counting in 2016, was 41. Verna Lloyd was 82 years old and living at a care facility in Ashby called Pleasant Grove. In a room with a bird feeder outside the window and 11 framed certificates of appreciation on the wall. Danny Rusk signed the visitor log with his real name. She knew who he was immediately. Her mind was completely intact. That was the worst part. He put the photocopy of the notebook card on her tray table. He put a photograph of a woman in a garden in Marrow Hollow beside it. He said, "She lived 17 more years." Verna Lloyd looked at the photograph for a while. Then she said, "Well, good for her." Danny said, "You told the sheriff she was unstable." Verna said, "She was." Danny said, "You told my mother at the church in 1995 that she'd been under strain." And Verna Lloyd said, "Your sister was a sentimental woman with a very small view of things." He asked her, straight out, what she'd said to Nora to make her run. And here she did not lie. She had not lied about any of it in 21 years, because nobody had ever asked her a single question. She said she had explained the situation to Nora clearly, that the child was gone from the county by 7 that morning and could not be gotten back. That if Nora went to the state, the first thing that would happen is that 40 families would have their children taken out of their houses by strangers. That the second thing that would happen is that Nora would be charged, because Nora had signed cards in that county for 4 years, and every one of them went through Bell Street, and Verna could make those cards say anything. And the third thing, Verna Lloyd told Nora Rusk that if she ever spoke a word, Verna would see to it that Wilma Rusk, who had worked 22 years at a nursing home, was investigated for what happened to the residents there. It wouldn't have been true, Verna said, in her room at Pleasant Grove, to the son of that woman. But it wouldn't have needed to be. Danny asked her why she'd done it. Any of it. All of it. And Verna Lloyd, who had a Bible on her nightstand and a bird feeder outside her window, gave the answer that people in that county still cannot get out of their heads. She said, "Because I saw who was having them, and I saw who deserved them, and somebody had to be honest about the difference." Danny stood up. He said, "She wasn't unstable. She just couldn't be here and be quiet at the same time." He walked to the door. And behind him, Verna Lloyd said mildly, like a woman correcting a hymn number, "She chose, young man. Nobody put her in that river. She took a baby that wasn't hers, and she got to be a hero about it for the rest of her life. Ask your niece who paid for that." He did not answer her. But she was wrong about one thing, and it took Danny 4 more months to find the proof of it. In July of 2015, June Ford went home to Marrow Hollow to clear the last of her mother's things out of the crawl space under the back room, because the house was going to be sold. She found a coffee can. Inside it, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, were 43 letters in her mother's handwriting. They were addressed to Danny Rusk, Farrell Street, Little Harmon. Not one of them had a stamp. Not one of them had been mailed. The first was dated September 20th, 1994, 6 days after. He read them on the porch, all of them, over about 5 hours, while June sat with him and didn't say anything. This is what was in them. She had not gone into the river. She had walked 38 feet from her truck at Cutter's Landing to where a woman she trusted was waiting in a car with a newborn in a laundry basket. That woman was a midwife from Wren County who had discovered that same summer what the clinic on Bell Street was. She was the one Nora had been meeting all through July and August. She was the reason Nora stopped humming. They had been building a case, quietly, slowly. Nora had been copying her own records because she'd realized her originals were being altered after she turned them in. They ran out of time on September 14th, when a girl went into labor 8 days early and the wrong midwife got called. Nora took the baby because she had 4 minutes to decide, and because at 5 a.m., Verna Lloyd had told her exactly what she was going to do with her. She left her boots on the tailgate because she wanted the search to go into the water and stay there, so that nobody would look north, so that nobody would look for a woman traveling with an infant. She wrote, "I know what it will do to Mama. I know what it will do to you. I have thought about that every hour. But I'm the only person alive who knows this baby was born. And if I disappear the wrong way, they will make her disappear too. And she will never have existed at all." And later, in 1997, "I could come back now. That is the truth, and I want it on the record. I am not staying gone because I'm afraid anymore. I am staying gone because she is 3 years old. And she calls me Mama, and if I walk into that sheriff's office, they will take her out of my arms and give her to strangers while lawyers argue about what I am. I have made my choice, and I know it is selfish in about 4 different directions." And in 2009, "Danny, you would be 34. I think about you being 34, and I cannot picture it. And that is my punishment, and I accept it." And the last one, dated March 2011, 4 months before she died, was 11 words long. I left my real name on the card. Find her. She had known. She had known that a person cannot go through life in this country without proving they exist, and that one day June would need that card, and that the card would carry her true name into a courthouse in Callum County where somebody, someday, might be reading. She could not testify. She could not come home. She could not write to her brother without risking everything. So she left one piece of paper in the world with her signature on it. And she waited, and she died, and she trusted that it would be enough. It didn't make sense for 21 years. It just didn't. And then it did. The letters plus Sissy Tolliver plus Eileen Buck plus a 41-year run of birth records was enough. The state opened a criminal investigation in September 2015, almost exactly 21 years to the day, Verna Lloyd was indicted in February 2016 on charges including falsification of vital records, unlawful transfer of a child, conspiracy, and coercion of a witness. She was 83. She pleaded not guilty and told a reporter on the courthouse steps, with her chin up, that she had served her county faithfully for 26 years. She was convicted in November on 22 counts. She died in a state medical facility 14 months later. She never said she was sorry to anyone about anything. Wade Cormier was charged as well. The 4.5 hours nobody could account for on the night of September 14th, 1994, were the 4.5 hours it took to drive an infant from Little Harmon to a house in Wren County. He had been Verna's courier for 6 years. That is where the cash came from. That is where the pharmacy came from. That is why a medical supply rep had a good lawyer in 11 hours. He had dated Nora Rusk for 18 months while she was investigating him, and never once suspected it. And she had dated him for 18 months while investigating him, and never once let it show. He took a plea. He got 9 years. His wife divorced him. His pharmacy was sold at auction to a chain. And then there was the other part. The part nobody in Clallam County was ready for. 41 people, aged 21 to 36, got letters from the State Office of Vital Statistics telling them their birth certificates were incorrect. Some of them wanted to know everything. Some of them threw the letter away. 2 of them sued. One woman drove to Little Harmon from Colorado and sat in the Blue Hen for 3 days, talking to anybody who would sit with her. There is no good way to do that to somebody. There was no good way not to. They brought Nora home in the fall. The reinterment was on a Saturday in the churchyard in Little Harmon, next to Ray and Wilma Rusk. There were more than 300 people there, which is a large number in a town of 2,000. And a fair few of them had said things at the Blue Hen in 1995 that they were now hoping had been forgotten. The Stone says, Nora Ellen Rusk, 1967 to 2011, also known for a while as Ellen Ford, she came when she was called. Hollis Tarpley was there. He was 78 and using a walker. And he had brought the file from his hall closet in a grocery sack. And he handed it to Danny and said, I'm sorry, son. I asked the right question, and I asked the wrong people. Danny told him he'd asked more questions than anybody else in the county had. And the old man cried in front of everyone and did not apologize for it. And Sissy Tolliver met June Ford for the first time in the church basement afterward. She was 38. June was 22. Sissy had a photograph in her purse of a sonogram from 1994 that she had kept in a drawer under her socks for 22 years because it was the only proof she'd ever had that she hadn't imagined the whole thing. She stood up when June came in. She got about half a sentence out. I want you to know I never once... And then her voice cracked all the way through and she couldn't finish. And June Ford crossed that basement and put her arms around her and said, into her hair, I know, he told me, I know. They stood like that for a long time, while a room full of people looked at the floor. June asked Sissy if she wanted to be called anything. Sissy said, Sissy's fine, honey. You already had a mother. And June said, I had too, I just didn't know it. June Ford finished her nursing degree in 2018. She works in labor and delivery at the regional hospital in Ashby, 40 minutes from where she was born, in the back room of a clinic that no longer exists. She has caught a few babies of her own now. In the hallway, in the elevator, once in a parking lot in February. She ties the cord off the same way every time. 2 loops, crossed opposite, a tuck under the second loop, pulled snug. The doctors think it's a quirk. She lets them think that. Danny Rusk still reads the legal notices in the Callum County Ledger on Thursday mornings, page 11, 6-point type, with his coffee. Cheryl asked him once why he keeps doing it, now that it's over. He said, "Because somebody else is looking for a name too." Here is the thing about this case that stays with you. It was not solved by a body. It was not solved by a confession or a fingerprint or a break in the weather 20 years on. It was solved because a 20-year-old girl needed a piece of paper to start a nursing program. And because a dying woman in a rented house had the presence of mind, 4 months before the end, to leave her real name where somebody would eventually have to read it. Nora Rusk did not vanish. She was pushed out of her own life by a woman with a title and a rubber stamp. And then she was quietly slandered for 21 years by a whole county that found it easier to believe a small, tired woman had walked into a river than to believe that the nurse from Bell Street was capable of anything at all. That is the part worth sitting with. Verna Lloyd did not build that system alone. She built it out of 41 families who never asked a question, and one town that agreed not to look, and every single person who heard, "Poor Nora, she just got tired," and let it pass. The people who disappear are not always running away. Sometimes they are standing between something small and something enormous. And the only way to keep holding the line is to stop being findable. Nora Rusk spent 17 years as a woman with no legal past, catching babies in kitchens for people who paid her in firewood so that one child would be allowed to exist. She never got to be thanked. She never got to come home. She never got to see her brother turn 34. But she was right about the one thing she said on that porch 16 days before the end. The paper is always there. Even when the people are gone, the paper is still there. It waited 21 years in a coffee can and a folded card and a line of 6-point type on page 11. And in the end, love proved stronger than the darkness, not because it was louder, but because it was patient enough to outlast every person who wanted the truth to stay buried.